The room went quiet before anyone said a word. I remember the way the candlelight caught the rim of Marcus's glass, the way it trembled slightly, just slightly, when Dominic walked through that door. 72 hours earlier, my husband had sat across from me at our kitchen table in Buckhead and told me he needed space. He said it the way men say things they've rehearsed, calm, measured eyes just slightly to the left of mine. And I had nodded. I had poured myself a glass of water and nodded. He had no idea what I already knew. He had no idea who Dominic Hale was to him and what Dominic Hale was about to become. By the time that night was over, Marcus would lose a business partner, a mistress, and the carefully constructed version of himself he had spent 11 years building on top of me. I didn't plan it this way, but I stopped being surprised by how things unfold when you finally decide to be still and let the truth do its own work. Before we go any further, what time is it, where you are right now? Drop your time and your country in the comments. I want to know who's here with me tonight. The house on Waverly Crest Drive had 4 bedrooms, 3.5 bathrooms, and a kitchen with marble countertops I had picked out myself from a supplier in Alpharetta. I remember standing in that showroom for 40 minutes, holding 2 nearly identical slabs of Calicut gold up to the light, trying to decide which one caught the warmth better in the afternoon. Marcus had waited in the car. He said marble was marble. I told him it wasn't. That was 11 years ago. We met at a fundraiser for the Atlanta Urban League, the kind of event where everyone is dressed slightly better than they feel. Holding drinks, they aren't really tasting, networking with the careful energy of people who know that who you know in this city matters as much as what you can do. Marcus was in real estate development, just starting to build what would become Hale-adjacent territory in Midtown and West Atlanta. He was charming in the way that men with plans tend to be focused, attentive, asking questions, and actually listening to the answers. I was 25 and finishing my last semester of graduate school in architecture at Georgia Tech. He told me my work sounded like I was building cities for people who actually had to live in them. I thought that was the most perceptive thing anyone had said to me in years. We were married 18 months later. The first years were good. I want to say that clearly because it matters not to excuse what came later, but because the pain of betrayal is always proportional to what was real. And what we had was real. We bought the house. We renovated it twice, once after Elijah was born, and once after Chloe arrived. I built a design practice out of a spare bedroom while nursing a newborn, taking on small residential commissions, building a portfolio project by project. Marcus grew his company from 3 employees to 31. We went to church on Sundays when we weren't too tired. We argued about money and in-laws and whose turn it was to handle Elijah's school forms. We took 1 good vacation a year, usually somewhere coastal, always somewhere warm. It looked like a life because it was one. Chloe was 8 now, and Elijah had just turned 11. On school mornings, the kitchen smelled like syrup, and the particular brand of controlled chaos that comes with 2 kids who can never find matching socks. Marcus left early most days, usually before 7, always in a suit, always with his phone already in his hand before he reached the bottom of the stairs. I had learned to read the rhythm of the house by his absence, which rooms felt different when he wasn't in them, which silences were just silence, and which ones were something else. I am an architect by training, which means I have spent my professional life understanding structures, how things are held together, where the load-bearing points are, what happens when you remove one. I had been watching our structure for about 4 months before I found the plane ticket. It wasn't even hidden. That's what I keep coming back to. It was in the breast pocket of his charcoal overcoat, the one hanging on the hook by the side door, the hook I pass every single morning when I take Chloe to the bus stop. A Delta confirmation, folded in thirds, printed on standard white paper. Atlanta to Savannah, Savannah back to Atlanta. A Friday and a Sunday. His name in the passenger field. 2 seats booked under the same confirmation number. He hadn't bothered to tear it in half. He hadn't moved it from the pocket of a coat I touched every morning. And later, when I would think about what that meant, whether it was carelessness or something closer to contempt, I still couldn't decide which answer was worse. I put it back exactly where I found it. I walked Chloe to the bus stop. I came home and made myself a second cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen island for a long time, looking out at the backyard where Elijah had left his bicycle sideways in the grass. Marcus came downstairs 20 minutes later, freshly showered, smelling like the cedarwood soap he'd used for years. He kissed me on the top of my head and asked if I'd seen his other cufflinks, the round silver ones. I told him I hadn't. He found them on the nightstand and left. I sat there for another 10 minutes and finished my coffee. There was a project deadline I needed to meet before noon. I pulled my laptop toward me and opened the files. Some things you can do nothing about until you know everything. I understood that instinctively, the way you understand structural load before you can fully articulate the physics. You don't remove a wall until you know what it's holding. I was going to find out what this wall was holding. And somewhere in the back of my mind, beneath the stillness, I was performing for no one in particular. Something had already shifted. Something quiet and permanent, the way a foundation moves, not with noise, not with drama, but with the slow certainty of weight redistributing itself. The marble countertops caught the morning light the way I had known they would. Marcus had said marble was marble. He had been wrong about that too. The first thing I noticed was the perfume. Not on him, that would have been too obvious. And Marcus was not a careless man in most respects. It was on the passenger seat of his car, which I drove exactly once that week, when my Volvo was at the shop having its rear brake pads replaced. He had left his Audi in the driveway for me and taken an Uber to a morning meeting. And I had climbed in, adjusted the seat, and immediately understood that someone had been sitting exactly where I was sitting recently for long enough to leave something behind. It was not a heavy scent. That's what made it harder to dismiss. A heavy perfume on a man's collar is a cliché, something you read about, something you expect. This was different. It was the kind of fragrance that settles softly into fabric rather than announcing itself. Something with amber and something else underneath it, faintly sweet the way expensive things tend to understate themselves. I sat there for a moment with my hands on the steering wheel before I backed out of the driveway. I didn't say anything to Marcus that evening. What I did instead was start paying a different kind of attention. Not frantic attention, not the attention of a woman unraveling, going through pockets at midnight and checking phone bills. The other kind. The patient, architectural kind, where you walk a structure slowly and let it show you where it's compromised. His phone had always been face down at dinner. I had assumed that was a habit of his generation of driven men, always available, always half present, a kind of professional reflex. But I began to notice the specific moments when it flipped, when we were in the same room, not when we weren't. When I came into the kitchen unexpectedly, when I sat down next to him on the couch. The phone turned over with the same smooth, practiced motion every time, the way you do something you have done so many times, it no longer requires a decision. I started counting. I also started noticing the calendar. Marcus kept a shared Google calendar for family logistics school pickups, Elijah's basketball practice dinner reservations, the quarterly pest control visits. We had set it up 4 years ago when the coordination of 2 working parents and 2 children became genuinely complicated. But in the last 3 months, a new pattern had appeared. Blocks of time marked simply work out of office. Not client meetings, not site visits, not the specific labels he used for everything else. Just that. White rectangles with no detail appearing on Thursday afternoons and alternate Fridays with a regularity that was in its own way a kind of honesty. The Savannah ticket had been for a Friday and Sunday. A Thursday afternoon, out of office, had preceded it by 2 days. I pulled the calendar up on my laptop one evening after the kids were in bed and went back 4 months. I counted 11 of those white rectangles. I sat with that number for a while. 11. The same number of years we had been married. There is a specific quality to the moment when something you suspected becomes something you know. It doesn't feel the way people describe it in movies. It doesn't hit you like a wave. It doesn't knock the breath out of you. It feels instead like a door closing, quiet and final, a soft mechanical click. And then the room on the other side of that door is just a room you're standing in now, and you have to decide what to do with the furniture. I did not cry that night. I went to the bathroom and washed my face and looked at myself in the mirror for a long time, the way you look at something you are assessing, rather than seeing. I noted the lines at the corners of my eyes that had appeared sometime in my early 30s without my permission. I noted the way my jaw was set. I went back to the bedroom and got into bed and lay on my side of the mattress and listened to Marcus breathing in the dark beside me. His breath was slow and even. He was sleeping fine. I was awake until 2:47 in the morning, and then I made a decision. I was not going to confront him. Not yet. Not without knowing the shape of everything first. Architects do not condemn a building based on a crack in one wall. You map the whole structure. You locate every fault line. You understand the full scope of what you're dealing with before you decide what comes down and what can be saved. So I started mapping. I called my college roommate Denise the next morning from my car, windows up, parked 2 blocks from Elijah's school. Denise had gone into family law and now ran a practice in Decatur with 4 other attorneys. I told her I needed a referral, not for me, I said. And then I stopped and started again. I told her the truth in about 4 sentences. She didn't say she was sorry. She said, "How long have you known?" And I said, "Long enough." She gave me a name and a number and told me to write it down. I wrote it down. That evening, I made pasta for dinner. Elijah's request rigatoni with meat sauce from scratch. And Marcus came home at 6:43 and sat at the head of the table and helped Chloe with the math homework she'd left until the last minute, and complained mildly about a contractor in Alpharetta who had missed a deadline by 2 weeks. He ate 2 full servings and said the sauce was good. He looked entirely at ease. I watched his hands when he passed the bread. The silver watch on his left wrist. The way he laughed at something Elijah said, easy and unguarded, the laugh of a man who does not believe the walls are moving. They were moving. I just hadn't told him yet. I found them on a Friday afternoon at 2:18 p.m. I know the exact time because I had a client call scheduled for 2:30. And I remember thinking as I sat in my car in the parking structure across from the Whitmore Hotel on West Peachtree Street that I was going to have to reschedule it. My hands were on the steering wheel, and I was not shaking. I want to be precise about that. I was not shaking. I had followed him for the first time that day. It was not something I had planned to do, not in the way you plan things deliberately. It was more that the opportunity arranged itself, and I let it. Marcus had told me Tuesday he had a site walk in Midtown Friday afternoon, back by 5. The Thursday out-of-office block was on the calendar. On Friday morning, he left at his usual time, and I dropped Chloe at school and came home and sat at my desk and tried to work on a set of drawings for a residential commission in Druid Hills, and could not focus on a single line. At noon, I closed the laptop. At 1:15, I got in my car. I told myself I was just driving. The Whitmore was a boutique hotel, 12 stories, dark brick facade, the kind of place that advertised itself as intimate and discreet, which meant expensive and anonymous. I had passed it 100 times. It sat on a block with a wine bar on one side and a dry cleaner on the other, unremarkable from the outside, exactly the kind of place you would choose if you needed to be somewhere without being seen. Marcus's black Audi was in the surface lot on the north side of the building. I parked across the street in the structure and found a spot on the second level with a clear sight line to the hotel's main entrance. I turned off the engine. I did not get out. I sat and watched the entrance the way I had learned to watch structures, without expectation, without urgency, just open attention, letting the thing reveal itself. I waited 23 minutes. They came out together through the main glass doors at 2:18. Marcus was wearing the navy suit he had put on that morning. I had watched him button the jacket in the bedroom mirror before he left. He had his phone in his right hand, and his left hand was at the small of her back. Not dramatically, not possessively, but with the easy familiarity of someone touching something that belongs to them. The gesture of a man entirely comfortable, entirely unguarded. She was younger than I had expected. That was the first thing my mind registered. Not pain, not rage, just that clinical note. Younger. Late 20s, I guessed. She wore a cream-colored wrap dress, and her hair was down relaxed, moving slightly in the October air. She was laughing at something as they came through the doors, her head tilting back, one hand touching his arm. There was a beauty mark above the right corner of her mouth. Even from where I sat, I could see it clearly. They stood on the sidewalk for approximately 4 minutes. I watched Marcus touch her face, once his thumb briefly at her cheek, the way you touch someone's face when you are saying goodbye and you do not want to. She said something, and he smiled. Not the public smile he wore at events, the wide one that reached his eyes on command. A smaller one, private. The smile of a man who believes he is not being watched. Then, she had walked to a white BMW 3 Series parked at the curb, and he walked back toward the lot where his Audi was. And I sat completely still in my car on the second level of a parking structure on West Peachtree Street and watched them separate as casually as two people leaving a coffee meeting. I did not follow him. I did not get out of the car. I sat there for a long time after both vehicles had gone, watching the space where they had stood on the sidewalk, as if the air still held the shape of what I had seen. The dry cleaner next door had a neon open sign blinking in its window. A woman walked past, pushing a stroller. A delivery truck idled at the corner with its hazards on. Everything around me was ordinary, aggressively, indifferently ordinary. I called my 2:30 client and told her I needed to push our call to Monday. I said something had come up with my children. I don't know why I said that it was the first thing that arrived. She said, "Of course, no problem, take care." I thanked her and hung up and put my phone face down on the passenger seat and sat with what I now knew. The thing about seeing it, actually seeing it, is that it removes the last room you had to hide in. As long as you only suspect, some part of your mind can still negotiate with the evidence, can still construct alternative explanations, can still live in the gap between what you fear and what you know. Seeing closes that gap permanently. There is nowhere left to stand except in the truth. I had stood in the truth for 11 years, without knowing which parts of it were real. Now I was recalibrating. On the drive home, I passed through 4 traffic lights and stopped at a Publix on Piedmont to pick up the oranges I'd forgotten earlier that week. I walked through the produce section and selected a bag of navel oranges and stood in the express lane behind a man buying sparkling water and a birthday card. I paid with my debit card. I drove home. I put the oranges in the fruit bowl on the kitchen counter. I went upstairs and changed out of my clothes and hung them carefully in the closet. I washed my face. I sat on the edge of the bathtub in the quiet of the upstairs bathroom and allowed myself exactly 10 minutes to feel everything I needed to feel. Then I stood up, dried my face, and called the attorney whose name Denise had given me. This time, I told her it was for me. The attorney's name was Vivian Carroll, and she had an office on the 14th floor of a building on Peachtree Center Avenue, with a view of downtown Atlanta that on clear days extended all the way to Stone Mountain. She was 53 years old and wore her silver locks pinned up and had the particular quality of stillness that comes from spending decades in rooms where people are falling apart. She did not offer me tissue when I sat down across from her. I appreciated that. I told her everything in about 20 minutes. She listened without interrupting, which is rarer than it should be. When I finished, she asked 3 questions. How long had we been married? Were both our names on the business assets? Had I signed anything in the last 18 months, any refinancing documents, any business agreements, any personal guarantees? I told her 11 years yes, to both names on the primary assets, and I wasn't certain about the last question. She said, "Find out." I went home that afternoon and did exactly that. Marcus kept physical copies of all major documents in a fireproof lockbox in the closet of his home office. A habit his father had instilled in him, something about never trusting digital files with anything that mattered. I had known the combination for 9 years. The same 4 digits as Elijah's birthday, chosen the year our son was born. He had never changed it. I wondered later if that was trust, or simply the assumption that I would never need to look. I opened the box on a Tuesday afternoon while Marcus was at a site meeting in College Park. And Chloe was at swim practice, and Elijah was at his friend Devin's house until 6. I had approximately 2 hours. I was systematic about it. I pulled every document and photographed each page with my phone. Working through the stack methodically, the LLC operating agreement for his company, the deed to the Waverly Crest house, the commercial property on Auburn Avenue he'd acquired 3 years ago, the investment account statements, the life insurance policy, a refinancing agreement from 14 months ago that I did not remember signing. I looked at that last document for a long time. My signature was on page 7. I recognized it the way you recognize your own handwriting, even when you don't remember producing it, the slight forward lean of the L in Luna, the way I close my A's. But I did not remember this document. I did not remember this transaction. I photographed every page of it, twice the front and the back, and then I put everything back in exactly the order I had found it, and closed the lockbox and reset the combination, and returned the box to its position on the shelf. I texted Vivian's office from the driveway and asked if I could send over some documents for her review. Her assistant responded within 4 minutes. The secure upload link arrived in my email by the time I pulled back into the garage. That evening, I made dinner as usual. Baked chicken thighs with roasted sweet potatoes, a Wednesday staple in our house for years. Marcus came home at 6:58, loosened his tie at the door, washed his hands at the kitchen sink. He asked how my day was. I told him I'd worked on the Druid Hills drawings and had a consultation call in the morning. He said that was good. Said the Druid Hills clients seemed like good people. I agreed that they were. We sat at the table, and Chloe told us about a disagreement with her best friend over something that had happened at recess, in a long and detailed account with several contradictory timelines that required careful listening to follow. Marcus and I both listened. He told Chloe that sometimes people say things they don't mean when they feel left out. Chloe considered this with the seriousness of an 8-year-old weighing a verdict. Elijah said the whole thing sounded exhausting, and Chloe threw a piece of roll at him. And Marcus said that was enough, and I got up to refill the water pitcher, standing at the kitchen sink with my back to the table. Listening to my family behind me, I felt something I did not expect. Not grief. I had moved past the first geography of grief already in the parking structure on West Peachtree. What I felt was closer to clarity. The particular calm that settles over you when you have stopped hoping something isn't true and started deciding what to do about the fact that it is. I was not going to blow up the house. I was going to take my time and do this correctly for Elijah and Chloe, for the practice I had spent 8 years building quietly in the margins of this marriage, for the version of myself that had been patient enough to deserve a clean exit rather than a scorched one. I had watched enough structures come down to know that the ones that fell badly were the ones where someone had gotten emotional and started pulling the wrong things first. I refilled the pitcher and came back to the table and sat down. Vivian called me the following morning at 8:47 after the kids were at school and Marcus was gone. She had reviewed the documents. Her voice had the measured weight of someone delivering information they want you to receive steadily. She told me the refinancing agreement contained a clause not standard, not typical, that had restructured a portion of the marital home equity into a holding entity under Marcus's company alone. She said it was the kind of language that takes a specialist to catch, that most people would sign past without recognizing what it transferred. She said the signature on page 7 was legally binding. She asked me again if I remembered signing it. I told her the truth. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Luna, I need you to keep doing exactly what you're doing. Don't change your behavior. Don't tip him off. I need about 3 weeks to map this fully." 3 weeks, I thought. I had already been living in the truth for longer than that. 3 more weeks was nothing. That afternoon, I drove to a FedEx office on Roswell Road and printed 3 complete copies of every document I had photographed. I put one set in a manila envelope and drove it to Denise's house and asked her to keep it somewhere safe without asking me questions. She took it without a word and put it on her kitchen counter and handed me a cup of coffee. I drove home. I picked up Chloe from swim practice. I helped Elijah review for a science test on the water cycle. I started a load of laundry at 9:15. Marcus came to bed at 10:40 and kissed me on the cheek the way he had for years and turned off his lamp and went to sleep. I lay in the dark and thought about Vivian's 3 weeks. I thought about the white BMW parked at the curb outside the Whitmore, the cream-wrapped dress, the beauty mark above the right corner of a mouth that had been laughing when it came through those glass doors. I didn't know her name yet, but I was going to. Marcus told us at dinner on a Thursday night, 17 days after I had sat in that parking structure and watched him touch her face. Chloe had asked him to help cut her pork chop, and he had done it methodically, the way he did small tasks, focused, efficient, without looking up. Elijah was talking about a basketball tryout scheduled for the following week, running through the names of kids he thought would make the team, building his case with the statistical confidence of an 11-year-old who had been watching ESPN since he was 6. The kitchen smelled like the rosemary I'd used on the potatoes. Everything was ordinary. Then Marcus set down his fork. He set it down with a kind of deliberateness that I recognized, not the carelessness of a man finished eating, but the intentionality of a man who has decided that now is the moment. I had seen that gesture before in other contexts. In meetings, Elijah had once told me his father always set down his pen before he said the most important thing. I had never verified this. I believed it instantly. He said he needed to talk to us about something. He set it to the table generally, which meant he was not looking at me specifically, which meant he had decided that what came next was easier to deliver if it was addressed to the room rather than to his wife. He said he had been doing a lot of thinking. He said that sometimes in a marriage, 2 people grow in different directions. And that didn't mean anything was wrong with either person. It just meant that things had changed. He said he felt like he needed some space to figure out what he wanted his life to look like going forward. He said the word space twice. Elijah had gone very still. He was 11 years old, and he understood subtext. He had always been perceptive in the way quiet children tend to be, absorbing more than they reveal. He put his fork down too slowly and looked at his father with an expression I recognized as the face he made when he was trying to calculate something he didn't have all the information for. Chloe looked up from her plate. She looked at Marcus first, then at me, then back at Marcus, with the wide particular attention of an 8-year-old trying to locate the shape of something she does not yet have language for. Then she asked the question in the voice she used when she already suspected the answer was going to require her to be braver than she felt. She said, "Daddy, where are you going?" The kitchen was silent for 3 full seconds. Marcus looked at Chloe with an expression I had not seen on his face before. Something that moved through him, visibly a passing disruption beneath the composed surface, like a tremor registering on equipment sensitive enough to catch it. He said he wasn't going anywhere right now. He just wanted them to know he and Mommy were going to be figuring some things out. Elijah looked at me then. Not at Marcus, at me. His eyes were steady and serious, and he held my gaze for a long moment in the way that children hold your gaze when they are deciding whether the adult in front of them is going to be all right. I kept my face even. I gave him the smallest nod I could, barely a movement, just a settling. And something in his expression shifted not to relief exactly, but to something adjacent to it. To trust. I did not look at Marcus. I cut a piece of potato and put it in my mouth and chewed it and swallowed it, and it tasted like nothing. After dinner, Marcus took Chloe for her bath, and I helped Elijah review his history notes, and then I cleaned the kitchen alone, running the water slightly hotter than necessary, the way I sometimes did when I needed the physical sensation of something to focus on. I loaded the dishwasher. I wiped down the countertops. I put the leftover pork chops in a glass container with a lid and placed them on the second shelf of the refrigerator. When Marcus came back downstairs, I was at the kitchen island with my laptop reviewing the Druid Hills drawings. He poured himself 2 fingers of Blanton's and stood at the counter and said he hoped that hadn't been too hard on the kids. I said children were more perceptive than adults generally gave them credit for. He said he thought it was better to be honest with them early, rather than let them sense something was wrong without understanding it. I said that honesty was generally a sound policy. He looked at me for a moment, a careful measuring look, the look of a man trying to determine the temperature of a room he has just walked into. I held the look without expression. I was a surface with nothing on it. I had practiced this without knowing I was practicing it. He took his bourbon to the living room and turned on the television. Low volume, the murmur of a sports channel filling the space between us. I went back to my drawings. At 9:40, my phone lit up with a text from a number I didn't recognize. 7 words. You should know who your husband is. I stared at it for a long time. Then I typed back 1 word, who is this? The response came 40 seconds later. A name. Not a full name, just a first name and a last initial. And then, before I could process what I was reading, a second message arrived. A screenshot, a LinkedIn profile page, a professional headshot of a man in his mid-40s, dark suit, American flag pin on his lapel, the composed expression of someone accustomed to being photographed in rooms where decisions are made. The name above the photo was Dominic Hale, senior managing partner, private equity, Atlanta-based. And directly beneath his name, in the small italicized line that LinkedIn uses for personal details that people include to humanize themselves in professional spaces, the line that says married to was a name I had not heard before that moment. Sienna Hale. I read it twice. Then I set my phone face down on the counter the same way Marcus set his, and I sat very still in my kitchen on Waverly Crest Drive and understood that the architecture of this situation had just revealed an entirely new load-bearing wall. One I had not seen coming. One that changed everything. I did not sleep that night. Not in the restless turning way of someone consumed by emotion. I lay still on my back in the dark, and I thought. Methodically. The way I think through a structural problem when the solution isn't immediately visible, and the only path forward is to map every load point until the answer becomes inevitable. Dominic Hale. I knew the name. That was the thing that kept surfacing as I lay there in the dark beside my sleeping husband. I knew the name because Marcus had said it at this same dinner table in this same house on multiple occasions over the past 2 years. Dominic Hale was not a stranger in the peripheral geography of my marriage. He was a presence in it referenced with the particular frequency that Marcus reserved for people who mattered to him professionally. A name said the way you say the name of someone whose opinion moves things. I got up at 4:47 and went downstairs. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen island with my phone and opened LinkedIn and found Dominic Hale's profile in under 90 seconds. Senior managing partner at Hale Capital Group Atlanta. Formerly with a private equity firm in Charlotte. board member of two nonprofits I recognized, one of which Marcus's company had done construction work for 18 months ago. The profile photo showed a man with a broad, composed face, close-cut silver at his temples, the kind of stillness in the eyes that comes either from discipline or from money or from both. Married to Sienna Hale. I went to Sienna's profile next. It was sparse, the kind of LinkedIn presence maintained for social proof rather than professional development. A few endorsements. A previous position at a marketing agency in Charlotte ending 4 years ago. No current employer listed. Her profile photo was small and somewhat distant, but I could see enough: the heart-shaped face, the wide-set eyes, the relaxed hair. The beauty mark was not visible at this resolution, but I knew it was there. She had moved from Charlotte to Atlanta approximately 3 years ago. Marcus's company had begun its working relationship with Dominic Hale's firm approximately 2.5 years ago. I sat with those 2 data points for a long time. At 6:15, I texted the number that had contacted me the previous evening. I asked how they had gotten my number and why they were telling me this. The response came back within minutes. A brief message carefully worded from someone who identified themselves only as a former colleague of Sienna's. Someone who had watched the situation develop and had reached a point where staying silent felt like complicity. They said they were not looking for anything from me. They said they thought I deserved to know the full shape of what I was dealing with. Then they sent me 3 more things. The first was a photograph taken at what appeared to be a private rooftop event, the Atlanta skyline visible in the background. Marcus and Sienna standing close, her hand on his chest, his arm around her waist, both of them laughing. The timestamp in the corner read 8 months ago. Neither of them was looking at the camera. They looked like a couple at their own party. The second was a forwarded email thread, partial beginning at the 4th message. In a chain, the earlier messages not included. But what remained was enough. References to a weekend in Charleston I had been told was a solo client trip. A sentence from Marcus that I read 3 times slowly that I am not going to reproduce here, because some things you absorb and then you set them down and you do not pick them up again. The third was a document. It took me a moment to understand what I was looking at. It was a single page, a preliminary term sheet, the kind used in early-stage investment negotiations, not legally binding in itself, but representing serious intent. It was dated 11 months ago. It outlined the terms of a potential equity investment by Hale Capital Group into Marcus's real estate development company. The investment figure was listed in the upper right corner. $4.2 million, 40% equity stake, pending final due diligence and formal agreement. I set my phone on the counter and stood up and walked to the kitchen window and looked out at the backyard in the early morning dark. Elijah's bicycle was still in the grass where it had been for 2 weeks. The motion sensor light above the garage door was on, triggered by something a cat, probably the gray one, that came through our yard most mornings. I understood now. This was not simply a man having an affair. This was a man who had become financially entangled with the husband of the woman he was sleeping with, either without knowing it initially or without caring, or with the particular recklessness of someone who believed he was managing multiple situations simultaneously, and that none of them would ever occupy the same room. $4.2 million, 40% of Marcus's company, in the hands of the man whose wife Marcus had been taking to the Whitmore Hotel on Friday afternoons for the better part of a year. I thought about the refinancing document Vivian had flagged, the clause that had restructured equity from the marital home into Marcus's company holding entity. The signature on page 7 that I did not remember signing. The money Marcus had moved into the company that Dominic Hale now owned 40% of. I called Vivian at 7:03 before her office opened, knowing she would not answer, and leaving a voicemail that was as precise and controlled as I could make it at 7 in the morning after no sleep. I told her I had new information. I told her the name Dominic Hale, I told her about the term sheet and the $4.2 million investment. I told her I believed the equity restructuring she had flagged and this investment agreement were connected. I told her I needed her to find out if they were. She called me back at 8:22. Her voice was different from our previous calls, not alarmed, but heightened the way a person sounds when they have just seen something that has expanded the scope of a situation they thought they had already mapped. She said she had pulled Dominic Hale's public business filings while I was on hold. She said the formal investment agreement between Hale Capital and Marcus's company had been signed and filed 6 months ago. She said that under the terms of that agreement, if Marcus's company were found to have engaged in conduct that materially misrepresented his personal circumstances to an investing partner, if, for example, it were established that Marcus had been in an undisclosed personal relationship with Dominic Hale's spouse. At the time the agreement was executed, there was a clause, a standard ethics and disclosure clause, the kind that private equity firms routinely include and routinely never need to invoke. The kind that, if invoked, entitled the investing partner to immediate withdrawal of capital plus damages. $4.2 million plus damages. I stood in my kitchen on Waverly Crest Drive in the early Atlanta morning and felt something I had not felt in weeks. Not rage, not grief. Something colder and more precise than either of those. I felt the structure of this situation become for the first time entirely legible. I knew every load-bearing point now. I knew exactly what would happen when the weight shifted. The dinner had been Marcus's idea. He had planned it 6 weeks earlier, before the conversation at the kitchen table. Before the word space, before any of it had surfaced into the open air between us. A company anniversary celebration, 10 years of Marcus Development Group. A private dining room at Seraph in Buckhead, one of those restaurants where the lighting is low and amber, and the menus don't list prices, and the staff moves with the particular discretion of people trained to be invisible. He had reserved the private room for 30 guests, key clients, business partners, a few close friends, 2 of his company's longest tenured employees. Dominic Hale was on the guest list. I knew this because I had helped compile it 3 months earlier, before the plane ticket, before the Whitmore, before the photograph on the rooftop with the Atlanta skyline behind them. I had sat at this same kitchen island with a glass of wine and Marcus's laptop and typed names into an event planning template, like a woman who believed she was building something. I had not removed myself from the guest list when things changed. That was a decision I made quietly, in the same way I had made all my decisions in those weeks, without announcing it, without explaining it, simply choosing it, and then living inside the choice until the moment arrived. Vivian knew I was going. She had not told me not to. What she had said in the measured voice she used when she was being precise was that I should not do anything that could be characterized as provocation, that I should not initiate any conversation with Dominic Hale, and that I should under no circumstances say anything to Marcus about what I knew before the formal proceedings she had begun were in a position to protect me. She said I should go be present, be composed, and let the evening be what it was. I told her I understood. I wore a dress I had bought 2 years earlier for a gala at the High Museum. Deep burgundy, structured at the shoulder, the kind of garment that does not ask for attention, but does not apologize for receiving it. I had my hair done in the afternoon, my locks pinned up with a few loose at the temples. I wore the pearl earrings my mother had given me when I graduated from Georgia Tech. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror for a moment before leaving and looked at myself the way I had been looking at myself in recent weeks, not for reassurance, but for information. I looked like a woman who knew exactly where she was going. My mother-in-law had come to stay with the children. She kissed me on the cheek when I came downstairs and told me I looked beautiful and asked if I was all right. She had the careful eyes of a woman who had been watching her son for 40 years and knew things she had never said aloud. I told her I was fine. She held my hand for a moment longer than necessary when she let go. Marcus was already at Seraph when I arrived. He was at the bar with 2 of his contractors, animated, relaxed, the version of himself he wore most comfortably in rooms full of people who admired him. He saw me come in, and something moved across his face. Surprise, I think, or a more complicated cousin of it. And then he recovered and crossed the room and kissed me on the cheek and told me I looked lovely. I thanked him. I found a position near the windows at the far end of the room where I could see the entrance, and I accepted a glass of sparkling water from a passing server, and I waited. The room filled steadily. 30 people in a space designed for intimacy creates a particular atmosphere close enough for voices to carry, warm enough for defenses to loosen, public enough that certain things cannot happen without witnesses. I had understood this when I chose not to remove myself from the guest list. A private dining room at Seraph on a Friday night in Buckhead was not a place where things could be easily contained once they began to move. Dominic Hale arrived at 7:43. I knew him immediately. The profile photo had been accurate, the silver at his temples the composed authority of his posture. He came in without Sienna, which I noted. He was alone, well-dressed, working the room with the ease of a man for whom social navigation is professional competency. He shook hands. He accepted a drink. He laughed at something one of Marcus's contractors said. He had not yet seen Marcus. Marcus had not yet seen him. I watched both of them from my position near the windows, and I felt nothing dramatic. No acceleration of breath, no tightening in my chest. Just that same cold clarity, that architectural precision, the sensation of watching load distribute itself through a structure that was about to be tested. They met in the center of the room at 7:51. I watched Marcus see Dominic and register his presence with the practiced warmth of a man greeting his most important investor. The handshake firm held slightly longer than a casual greeting, the hand on the shoulder, the wide smile that reached Marcus's eyes on command. Dominic smiled too, but his smile was a different temperature. I had seen enough negotiations in my professional life, sitting across tables from contractors and developers and clients who wanted one thing while saying another, to recognize the quality of a smile that is performing something other than what it appears to be. Dominic's smile was the smile of a man who had arrived with a purpose and had not yet deployed it. They talked for 4 minutes. I counted. On the 4th minute, Dominic said something that made Marcus's expression shift barely microscopically, the kind of shift that only registers if you are watching with the specific attention I had been cultivating for weeks. Marcus's chin lifted slightly. His left hand, the one with the silver watch, moved to the back of a nearby chair and gripped it. Dominic leaned in slightly and said something else. And then, in a voice low enough that I could not hear the words from where I stood, but clear enough that I could read the weight of them in the set of his jaw and the stillness of his body. Dominic Hale said the thing he had come to say. Marcus went very still. The kind of still that is not composure, but the physical suspension of a man whose entire system has just received information it does not know how to process yet. Dominic straightened, adjusted the cuff of his jacket, picked up his drink from the high table beside them, and took a measured sip. Then he said quietly in the voice of a man who has no need to raise it, "We need to talk tonight, before you give your remarks." Marcus said something I could not hear. Dominic nodded once slowly, the way you acknowledge a response that confirms what you already knew. Then he turned, and his eyes moved across the room, the scanning assessment of a man reorienting himself in a space, and they landed briefly, precisely on me. I did not look away. I held his gaze for 3 full seconds. Then I raised my glass of sparkling water slightly, the smallest acknowledgement, the quietest possible gesture, and I looked away first, not because I was retreating, but because I had already said what I needed to say with it. I had been here the whole time. I knew everything. And I was not afraid of this room. Across the amber-lit space, Marcus stood at the center of his own celebration, with his hand on the back of a chair. And for the first time in 11 years, he looked from where I stood, genuinely small. Marcus gave his remarks at 8:15. I watched him stand at the front of the room with a microphone that didn't need to be a microphone. In a space that small, and I understood that the microphone was not about volume. It was about ceremony, about the performance of a man at the center of something he had built, doing the thing such men do at such moments, expressing gratitude with the practiced fluency of someone who has learned that graciousness deployed correctly consolidates power rather than diminishing it. He thanked his team. He thanked his clients. He thanked his partners. His eyes moved to Dominic when he said that word, a fraction of a second controlled, but I caught it the way you catch things when you have been watching someone with total attention for weeks. He thanked me last. He said my name and looked across the room at me and said that behind every structure worth building, there is someone who understands what it costs, and that I had always understood that. He said it with warmth and fluency, and the assembled room turned briefly toward me with a collective, approving attention of 30 people who believed they were witnessing a man honoring his wife. I smiled. It was the most precise smile I have ever produced. The remarks lasted 6 minutes. Applause followed genuine warmth, the sound of a room that did not yet know what the next 40 minutes would contain. Marcus descended from his moment at the front and was immediately absorbed into conversations, backslaps, the social current of a successful evening in full motion. Dominic found him again at 8:31. I know the time because I had been watching the clock on my phone intermittently, the way you monitor something you know is approaching. And when I looked up from my glass and saw Dominic moving through the room with that same purposeful calm he had carried since he arrived, I noted it automatically. They moved to the far corner of the private room near the secondary bar that had not been open for the evening, a quieter edge away from the main current of conversation. A third person joined them within 2 minutes, Raymond Osei, one of Marcus's 2 other senior investment partners. A man I had met perhaps 4 times at company events, always precise, always watchful. I had not known Raymond would be there tonight. I understood seeing the 3 of them together in that corner that Dominic had not arrived alone. In any meaningful sense, even though he had walked in through the door by himself. I moved closer. Not to the conversation, I positioned myself near a cluster of guests I recognized, joined the edge of their exchange. Briefly laughed at the appropriate moment, and arranged myself so that I was within partial earshot of the corner, without being visible as someone who was listening. I heard fragments. Enough fragments. Dominic's voice was low and level, the voice of a man delivering a prepared statement rather than having a conversation. I heard the word agreement. I heard the phrase material misrepresentation. I heard Raymond say something with a sharp intake of breath before his voice dropped below what I could catch. I heard Marcus say once, in a register I had never heard from him before, not loud, not aggressive, but thin, the voice of a man whose air supply has been unexpectedly reduced. That's not what this is. Dominic said something in response. Marcus did not reply. I moved away then. I had heard what I needed to hear, and I did not need to witness the specific geometry of a man's unraveling at close range. I found a seat near the window and set my glass down on the table and looked out at the Buckhead streetscape below the lights, the cars moving through the intersection, the ordinary Friday night persistence of a city that had no awareness of what was happening 30 floors above it. My phone buzzed at 8:49. A text from Vivienne. 2 words, it's filed. I had authorized her to file the formal separation and asset protection documents that week, with instructions to execute at her discretion once she confirmed all paperwork was in order. She had chosen tonight. I did not know if she had known about the dinner. I had mentioned it in passing, but the timing was either instinct or strategy, and either way, it was correct. I put my phone in my clutch. At 9:03, Raymond Osei left the dinner. He did not say goodbye to Marcus. He caught the eye of one of his associates near the door, a brief nod, and they left together with the quiet efficiency of men who had somewhere more important to be. 2 other guests followed within 10 minutes, not conspicuously, not in a way that announced itself, but the room contracted in the way rooms do when the people with real weight in them begin to exit. Marcus stood at the center of his own party, and I watched him understand what was happening, not all at once, gradually. The way a structure doesn't collapse in an instant, it shows distress. First, small signs, hairline fractures visible only to someone who knows where to look. His jaw, the frequency with which his hand moved to his phone, the way his laugh deployed twice more in the next 15 minutes, with guests who didn't know anything had shifted, arrived a half-second too late each time, like a man remembering to perform something he usually does naturally. Dominic left at 9:17. He stopped beside me on his way to the door. He didn't say much. He said he was sorry for what I was going through. He said it simply, without drama, looking at me directly. Then he said one more thing quietly that I will keep for myself. He offered his hand and I shook it, and he left. And I stood there, with the warmth of that brief handshake still in my palm, and thought about the strange mathematics of situations like this one. How the people you expect to be adversaries sometimes turn out to be the ones who looked you in the eye. By 9:45, the room had thinned to perhaps a third of its original occupancy. Marcus found me near the window at 9:51. His face had rearranged itself into something I recognized as an attempt at composure. But the underlying architecture was visible now, the tightness around his jaw, the flatness that had replaced the warmth in his eyes, the particular stillness of a man who is managing catastrophic information in a public space and has not yet identified the correct response. He said my name. I turned and looked at him. He said he needed to talk to me. He said things had gotten complicated tonight, and he needed me to understand that whatever I had heard, whatever was being said, it wasn't the full picture. I waited. He said Dominic was making claims that weren't accurate. He said Raymond had overreacted. He said he could explain the investment agreement and the equity restructuring. And all of it, he just needed time. He just needed me to trust him for a little while longer. Trust him. I thought about the parking structure on West Peachtree at 2:18 on a Friday afternoon. I thought about the refinancing document on page 7 with my signature on it. I thought about Chloe's voice at the dinner table, asking where he was going, and the 3 seconds of silence before he answered her. I picked up my clutch from the table. I told him my attorney's name. I told him she had filed that evening, and that he would be receiving the relevant documentation within 48 hours. I told him I hoped the next chapter of his life went the way he wanted it to go. Then I walked through the amber-lit room, past the tables with their half-finished glasses, and the staff beginning the quiet work of clearing past the place, near the secondary bar where he had stood 40 minutes earlier, and understood what he was losing, and out through the door and into the corridor and into the elevator and down through the lobby of Seraph and out onto the Buckhead sidewalk where the October air was cold and clean and the city was exactly as loud and indifferent as it had always been. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment. I breathed. Then I called my mother-in-law to tell her I was on my way home to my children. The first call I didn't answer came at 11:04 that night. I was sitting on the edge of Chloe's bed in the dark, listening to her breathe the slow, even rhythm of a child who had gone to sleep believing her world was intact, which it was, which I had made certain it would remain. Marcus's mother had gone to bed in the guest room. The house was quiet in the way houses are quiet at that hour, settling into itself the small sounds of wood and pipe and air that you stop hearing after you've lived somewhere long enough. My phone screen lit the nightstand. Marcus. I watched it ring and did not pick it up. He called again at 11:19, at 11:42, at 12:07, and once more at 12:53, that last one arriving after I'd moved to the living room. With a blanket and a cup of chamomile tea, I was not drinking so much as holding. 5 calls across 2 hours, not frantic, not rapid fire the way panic sounds, but spaced with the measured persistence of a man working through a calculation. and adjusting his approach between attempts. I did not answer any of them. In the morning, he sent a text. A long one, the kind that arrives in 3 successive bubbles because it exceeds the character architecture of a single message, the digital equivalent of a letter written under pressure. I read it once, completely standing in the kitchen while the coffee brewed. He said he knew he had made mistakes. He said he knew an apology wasn't sufficient. He said the business situation was more complicated than it appeared, and that Dominic was acting out of wounded pride rather than legitimate grievance. He said he needed to talk to me before lawyers made things irreversible. He used the word irreversible twice. I put my phone in my cardigan pocket and poured my coffee and went to wake the children for their Saturday morning. The call from Raymond Osei's assistant came on Monday. Raymond wanted to speak with me directly, not through attorneys, not through intermediaries. Just a brief call if I was willing. I told Vivian about it before I agreed, and she told me I could take it with her on the line. Muted listening. We arranged it for Tuesday at 10. Raymond was measured and professional the way men in his position tend to be when the situation has already moved past the point where posturing serves any purpose. He told me that Hale Capital was formally invoking the ethics clause in the investment agreement. He told me the withdrawal of the $4.2 million investment would be accompanied by a damages claim under the misrepresentation provision. He told me that 2 of the 3 other investors Marcus had brought in on his most recent commercial development men, who had come in on the basis of Dominic Hale's participation, on the credibility that Hale Capital's involvement conferred, had already begun making inquiries about their own exit options. He was not telling me this to wound Marcus. He was telling me I understood, because I was a party to this situation whose interests deserved to be named. He said he hoped I had good legal representation. I told him I did. After the call ended, Vivian said in her measured way that things were moving faster than she had anticipated. Within the week, the professional consequences had begun to arrange themselves with the impersonal efficiency of dominoes that have been properly aligned. The commercial development project in College Park, Marcus's largest active project, the one he had been building toward for 3 years, was placed in procedural hold when 2 of the 3 investors formally requested a review of the partnership agreement. The Auburn Avenue commercial property, which Marcus had been in late-stage negotiations to sell to a hospitality group, went quiet. The hospitality group stopped returning calls. Word travels in Atlanta the way it travels in any city, where a certain tier of professional society is small enough that the same 40 people appear at the same events for 20 years. It does not travel loudly. It travels in the register of people suddenly becoming unavailable, of returned emails that are slightly more formal than they used to be, of invitations that do not arrive. Marcus's assistant of 6 years resigned on a Thursday. She texted me the following day. A brief message. She said she was sorry. She said she had always respected me. She said she hoped the children were all right. I thanked her and told her I hoped her next chapter was a good one. I meant it. Sienna had left Atlanta by then. I learned this not through direct information, but through the particular silence that falls when someone vacates a space Dominic had relocated temporarily to their property in Charlotte, according to a mutual acquaintance who mentioned it without knowing all the reasons why. Whether Sienna had gone with him or gone somewhere else entirely, I did not know and did not pursue. She was not the architect of what had happened to my marriage, even if she had been a willing participant in its dismantling. I had no feeling toward her that required any action. She was simply someone who had been in a room and was now not in it. Marcus moved into a furnished apartment in Midtown in the 3rd week. His mother came to me the night before he moved out. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where he had told us he needed space, and she held both my hands in hers and said that she was ashamed, and that she loved me, and that whatever happened going forward, she wanted to be in the children's lives, if I would allow it. I told her that went without saying. She cried then quietly, the controlled crying of a woman who has had occasion to master it over many years. I handed her a tissue, and we sat together in the kitchen for a long time, without saying much, which was its own kind of conversation. The morning Marcus left with 2 suitcases and a cardboard box. Elijah was at basketball practice, and Chloe was at a birthday party at a classmate's house. I had arranged it that way deliberately, not to deprive them of a goodbye, but because I knew their father would not leave cleanly if they were watching, and I needed the leaving to be clean. He stood in the hallway with his box and his bags, and looked at the house. The marble countertops visible from where he stood, the drawings I had framed and hung in the entry years ago, the growth chart penciled on the inside of the pantry door, where we had marked Elijah and Chloe each birthday, since they were old enough to stand against it. He said my name. I stood at the foot of the stairs and waited. He said he was sorry. He said it plainly, without the architecture of justification around it, which was the most honest thing he had said to me in longer than I could locate. I believed him. Believing someone is sorry is not the same as being restored by it, but it is its own thing, a small separate piece of information that you file away from the larger damage. Not because it repairs anything, but because it is true, and the truth matters, even when it arrives too late to change anything. I told him I hoped he figured out what he was looking for. He picked up his box and his bags and walked out through the side door, the same door where his overcoat had hung on the hook I passed every morning, the hook where I had found the plane ticket that had started all of this. And I heard his car back out of the driveway, and the sound of it diminished down Waverly Crest Drive until it was gone. I stood in the hallway for a moment. Then I went to the pantry door and looked at the growth chart. Elijah's marks in blue, Chloe's in red, 11 years of small lines climbing toward the top of the door frame, each one dated in my handwriting, each one recording a moment when one of my children had been measured and found to be more than they had been the year before. I picked up the pencil that lived on the pantry shelf for exactly this purpose. I made a small mark at my own height. I wrote the date beside it. Then I put the pencil back and went to pick up my daughter from her party. 8 months is not a long time. I know this because I have lived inside it each week, distinct each month, carrying its own particular weight and texture. Nothing blurring into anything else the way people say time does when you are surviving something. 8 months felt like 8 months. It felt like every day of it. And I am still here. The office is on the 4th floor of a building on Edgewood Avenue in the old 4th Ward. Not a large space, not a prestigious address in the Buckhead sense, but a corner unit with east-facing windows that catch the morning light in a way I noticed the first time I walked through it and have not stopped noticing since. There is a drafting table I bought second-hand from an architectural firm that had closed in Decatur, a good oak desk, 2 chairs for clients, a small kitchen alcove with a coffee maker that runs from 7 in the morning until I leave. My name is on the door. Luna Mercer Design. Not a name I had before. Mercer is my mother's maiden name, the name I grew up inside before I traded it for someone else's story. I am building my own story now. The first independent commission came through Denise, who had quietly mentioned my name to a developer she knew who was looking for someone to lead the design on a mixed-use project in East Atlanta Village residential, above commercial. Below the kind of project that requires someone who understands how people actually inhabit space. I met with the developer in February, 6 weeks after Marcus moved out, on a Tuesday morning when I was running on 4 hours of sleep. And the particular focused energy that comes from having nothing left to perform for anyone. I got the commission. It was not the largest project I had ever worked on. It was the most mine. Vivienne had moved efficiently through the divorce proceedings, which Marcus had not contested in any meaningful way. A man navigating the simultaneous collapse of a marriage and a business does not have the reserves to fight on both fronts, and whatever else Marcus was, he was not stupid. The settlement was fair, which is to say it reflected the actual shape of our financial life together, rather than the distorted version the refinancing document had been quietly constructing. The Waverly Crest house remained with me and the children through the proceedings. The equity that had been restructured was unwound. Marcus kept his company what remained of it after Hale Capital's withdrawal, and the investor's departures had forced a significant contraction, and I kept the life I had built inside the marriage and would now build past it. Elijah turned 12 in March. We celebrated at home his request a cookout in the backyard with his basketball friends and Devin, and a grocery store cake with blue frosting that he had selected himself from a laminated photo card. The kind of choice that is entirely his own, and therefore exactly right. He stood in the backyard in the afternoon light with his friends and laughed at something someone said. And I watched him from the back porch and felt the particular quality of gratitude that has no adequate name. Not relief, not happiness. Something older and quieter than either of those. The gratitude of a parent watching a child continue to become themselves through something that could have diminished them and did not. "He is going to be all right," Chloe asked me once in the spring while I was braiding her hair on a Sunday morning whether our family was broken. I thought about the question for a moment, really thought about it because she deserved a real answer and not a managed one. I told her that our family had changed its shape. I told her that changing shape was not the same as breaking. I told her that some of the strongest structures in the world are the ones that were redesigned after the original plan turned out to be wrong, that architects do this all the time, that finding out a plan needs to change is not failure. It is information, and information is how you build something better. She thought about this with the seriousness she brings to things that matter to her. Then she said, "So we're being redesigned?" I told her yes, exactly that. She seemed satisfied with this. She went back to watching her show, and I went back to her hair. And the Sunday morning continued the way Sunday mornings continue, ordinary and irreplaceable, the specific texture of a life that is actually being lived. Marcus sees the children on alternating weekends. He has been consistent about it, which I give him credit for, because consistency in that particular form is a choice made repeatedly under conditions where it would be easier not to. Elijah comes home from those weekends quieter than usual, processing something I don't press him on. Chloe comes home with stories about restaurants and movies, and once a go-kart track in Roswell that she described in such detailed enthusiasm that I had to laugh. They are navigating their father as he now is, rather than as he was, which is its own kind of growing up arrived at earlier than I would have chosen for them. I cannot control the timing of what they have to learn. I can only be present for the learning. The Druid Hills Commission finished in April, the residential renovation I had been working on through all of it, the project that had lived on my laptop, through the parking structure and the lockbox, and the dinner at Seraph, and the morning Marcus drove away down Waverly Crest. I delivered the final drawings and walked the completed space with my clients, and stood in the finished kitchen, different countertops than mine soapstone, beautifully chosen, and felt the satisfaction of something built with sustained attention, surviving the circumstances that surrounded its making. Good work doesn't know what was happening in your life while you were doing it. It just stands there and holds. I signed the East Atlanta Village contract on a Thursday morning in May in the new office at the Oak Desk, with Denise sitting across from me because she had driven over specifically to watch. Afterward, we got lunch at a West Indian place 2 blocks away and split a piece of rum cake and talked for 2 hours about nothing related to any of it. Her kids, a novel she was reading, a trip she was planning to Savannah in the fall. The ordinary life continuing. On the morning I am writing this, if writing is the right word for the act of finally saying what happened out loud to whoever is willing to listen. I am sitting at my drafting table in the east-facing office on Edgewood Avenue. The light is coming in the way it does on clear Atlanta mornings, direct and specific, the kind of light that makes the surface of things visible. There is coffee. There are drawings spread across the table. There is a to-do list with 7 items on it, 2 of which I will finish today and 5 of which I will carry into tomorrow, which is how to-do lists work when you are actually doing things, rather than waiting for your life to resume. I am not waiting for anything. I want to say one more thing before I go, and I say this not as someone who has arrived at the other side of something clean and resolved. Because I haven't, because you don't, because real life does not resolve the way stories do. I say it as someone still inside the redesign, still measuring, still making daily decisions about which walls to keep and which ones served a purpose they no longer serve. The thing I know now that I did not know before is this: the life you build on top of another person's story is not your life. It is a life. It may be a good one. It may be a real one. It may contain years of genuine love and 2 children who are the best things you have ever made. But it is built on ground that is not entirely yours. And when that ground shifts, you find out very quickly what you were actually standing on. What I was standing on was more than I had known. I found that out when I had to. I'm standing on it still. More fully now, more deliberately, with the particular attention of a woman who has learned to read structures before she builds on them. Who knows where the load bears, where the fault lines run what holds, and what only looks like it holds. Build on your own ground. That is the only thing I know how to tell you. And if you are sitting somewhere right now, in the middle of something that has changed the shape of what you thought your life was, if you are in the parking structure moment, or the document moment, or the dinner table moment, where someone said a word like space and the room went quiet in the wrong way, I want you to know that the other side of it is not a myth. It is a Thursday morning in Atlanta. It is East light and coffee and drawings spread across a table and your name on the door. It is enough. It is more than enough. If this story reached something in you tonight, leave a comment. I want to hear from you. And if you know someone who needs to hear this right now, share it with them. Subscribe if you want to stay. I will be here.